I know you've been busy. You've been talking to a lot of the folks within Sui, talking to a lot of people within Phi Labs, which is a core contributor to Archway. What would you say is really exciting about Sui right now?
With Sui, I think it's a couple things. Like I'd say first off, they have a really good technical stack. Like a lot of the developers I talk to really enjoy utilizing Move and building within the Sui ecosystem. So I think it's always helpful when you have like the dev buy-in because they're ultimately the ones who are building the applications. I also think that they've done a great job at just that, expanding out their ecosystem, building a lot of different apps, albeit they are pretty focused on DeFi specifically with their applications. But from what I gathered, this past cycle and even recently is the DeFi apps seem to be really the only applications that are genuinely keeping people around and keeping volume and earning fees. So I think Sui in general has just done a great job of building out that initial ecosystem, offering a stack that developers like to build on. And then on top of that, they've been able to raise a ton of money. And in this space, having capital at your hand to deploy is really useful, whether it's through marketing, whether it's through funding teams or incentives to get people to adopt your network or applications are built on it. So they have a few different things kind of going their way. And it seems like they've also kind of caught the attention of the mainstream. And that's always I would say the hardest part.
But, now you have like other chains that are popping up that are supposedly just as fast, just as seamless. Like everyone's talking about, say, on the EVM side. You have Hyperliquid. Of course, they're like specific to trading, but there's a lot of competition now. Do you think that Sui still can withstand like all of that?
I do, because I do think there's enough room for all of the chains you mentioned to be successful in this space. Like I think there could be 15 or 20 chains that are, ultimately the winners. And I think Sui definitely fits into that. Although there are a lot of different chains doing similar things, especially with like the finality time, that's becoming more and more popular where you're just seeing really fast blockchains in terms of settlement. But I think Sui kind of has a differentiation from a lot of these is their stack. Move is quite different, although it's technically Rust based at its core. It has some unique features to it and how it operates. That's always going to be, an advantage is having a different type of stack that a certain developer may like more than another, which may not allow them or may not drive them to build somewhere else. Although they offer a lot of the same benefits as like a Solana or maybe a Say, I think they are differentiated to an extent. And really, I think they address a different market for the most part than some of these other chains. Their demographics primarily like in the Asian continent. So a lot of these other chains like Solana, I think have a lot of appeal, especially within the United States. And they also do in Asia. I'm not saying they don't, but I feel like their core audience would be the US, whereas Sui's more focused, I would say, on the Asian markets and now starting to adopt the US as well. Ultimately, there's some slight differentiations. And again, it just comes down to the fact I do think there'll be multiple winners. There won't be just one or two chains that are the only ones that see success over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
One of the other things that we talk about on this show, Max, is revenue and how it allows for you to look past the hype. Is there anything that you've noticed in terms of like fee generation, whether it's like a specific application on Sui where you feel, okay, there's some traction here. This can grow to something big?
Yeah, I mean, they have a few. So like I would say Walrus is one. It's essentially their decentralized compute layer that they've built out. And I believe that's doing pretty well in terms of fee generation. They also have like a central order book that they operate. I believe it's called DeepBook. And so they're earning a lot of fees on that because there's a lot of trades happening and they're also market making, maybe not them personally, but they have people market making those books. So they're definitely earning fees on that. And the applications themselves built on top of them seem to be doing really well. I mean, they have perps exchanges, which we've seen just in general are really one of the key cash cows in this space. You really only see a few different types of apps that are generating significant fees. It's the perpetuals, it's the lending and borrowing protocols, it's the liquid staking. And then there's a few other ones outside of that, like the gaming side of things where you'll see some of these things. A newer one that I've recently been looking into is called Football.Fun. And it's kind of like a mix of fantasy football where you can own shares in players and then they compete, in tournaments based on who you hold. And I think they've generated even a couple $1 million in fees over the past like week. So as far as I know, they only raised a small round. It was like 2 million at fairly low FDV. I think it was somewhere between like 10 and 20 million FDV. And they launched their initial platform, which is soccer, more football to most people who are not from the United States. And I've seen that they've been talking about adding additional sports as well, like American football and possibly the NBA down the line. So, I mean, I've tested out the platform. It's actually really fun. It's kind of a mix of like speculation with fantasy sports. I think it has a large appeal to Web2 audiences. And I'm always a fan of something that has like actual utility and is fun to play. And it being on the blockchain is more of like a background effect.
My buddy loves Prize Picks. That's like his go-to for fantasy apps. So maybe this could be like a good way for me to see an experiment, because he's not into crypto, but maybe I can get him to onboard using this platform. It would be a very interesting experiment, because if it works for him, it can work for millions of other people. Any other teams that come to mind in terms of like you really like what they're doing, and maybe creative and maybe just a successful business model?
Within Sui, I mean, I think there's a few solid platforms. I really enjoy using like Momentum, which is essentially like a DEX and a place where you can provide liquidity. They still have a lot of incentives that are being offered on a lot of their pools. So the APRs are pretty high, and you can pair up against, Sui and USDC if you want to be kind of conservative. You compare it against, Lombard Bitcoin or Ethereum. So there's actually a lot of good pairings where a user might feel comfortable with whatever way it goes. And it also allows you to do concentrated liquidity. So that's mainly what I participate in. Is I'll find, 2 tokens I'm comfortable holding and do some really tight ranges and just monitor those. And sometimes the APRs, because you're in such a tight range, can be, 1,000%, sometimes even higher. So it allows you to really actually earn quite a bit of yield. So I'm a fan of Momentum. I think they have solid UX. They're currently doing like a points program right now. So I'm sure people will like that, just because there's always the potential for a future airdrop or reward. And I also have used I think it's called Zoe. It's like a perpetual market. It's another one that it offers you up to like 50x leverage on a lot of assets. Pretty solid UX, and I'm sure they're doing well on the fees, but then they're also offering a points program. So those are 2 of them that I really enjoyed. I really like using Aftermath. Again, just clean UX, easy swap, and they also offer the aggregator side of things. There's quite a few others that I've played around with, but those are probably 3 of the more common ones I use on like more of a daily basis. I'm excited to see what they're going to do with like Walrus. When I was in, I think it was Dubai for Basecamp, they had mentioned, I don't know if it's an add-on to Walrus or a separate protocol. I believe it's just part of the Walrus protocol, but it's called Seal. And it's going to be like a privacy layer for the data. And that's always something that I thought was kind of missing when you look at these like compute and data layers, is that there was no privacy. So if you upload files or anything to it, they're somewhat exposed. So adding this privacy layer, I think, will make that product a lot more appealing to users, and then maybe even make it more appealing to like Web2 companies and others who are just looking for cheap storage.
If you're a founder or operator in Web3 and want to connect with others like you, head on over to networkspotlight.io and apply to become a member. See you on the inside.